we may think of mental disorders, which are a significant global health issue. And the reason why I say that is because, according to the World Health Organization, let me just jump to the beginning of my slides. I'll start again. So I'm talking about tools for mental health and well-being. When we think about mental health, many people think about mental disorders, which are a significant global health issue today. And the reason why I say this is because, according to the World Health Organization, depression is one of the leading causes of disability. Around 1 in 5 children and adolescents around the world have a mental health condition. Suicide is the second most common cause of death among young people. And in fact, people with severe mental health conditions die 10 to 20 years earlier than the general population. And in economic terms, anxiety and depression, they're the top two most common mental health conditions, and together they're costing the global economy about $1 trillion every year. Now, mental health is not simply the absence of disorder, just as our health is not merely the absence of disease. Now, according to a global report from the World Health Organization this year, defines mental health as a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, to realize their abilities, to learn well and work well, and to contribute to their communities. Now, today, I want to talk about how Confucian thought might contribute to mental health and well-being by providing different perspectives on history topics, on the topic of realizing our potential, on our worries in life, and making the most of life circumstances. So without further ado, realizing our potential. We often talk about realizing our potential, but what exactly do we mean? And particularly from a Confucian perspective. I'd like to introduce you to, for those of you who may not know, Mencius is the Chinese philosopher who lived about 100 years after Confucius in the 4th century before the Common Era. And he's respected as the second sage in the Confucian tradition, second only to Confucius himself. And during Mencius's time, the authority, the order of the Zhou ruling house, the Zhou dynasty, had declined, such that the political situation had become volatile. Various states were vying with each other for power and waging war against each other. So Mencius lived in what was called the Warring State period. Now, during this time, politicians, statesmen, and many people, they looked to the philosophers and other scholars for governing strategies and ideas. Now, it's traditionally thought that Mencius studied under Confucius's grandson, Zisu, or one of his students. Mencius, he practiced, he taught, he developed Confucius's teachings. He defended Confucius's teachings against the face of the competing theories at the time. Mencius spent much of his career traveling from state to state, meeting with rulers and hoping to influence their policies in hopes that people could recover the traditional values and rituals that had once made their society, strong and humane. Mencius was the first Chinese philosopher to advocate that human nature is innately good. This goodness is, according to Mencius, a limitless potential to bring out moral excellence in ourselves and in others. According to Mencius, this goodness can be broken down into 4 moral qualities: humanity, rightness, propriety, wisdom. Now, briefly speaking, humanity is a sense of compassion for others. Rightness involves doing the right thing, and a sense of shame in doing what is dishonorable. And propriety is a sense of respect for others. Wisdom involves sound judgment and reasoning, and taking into account the interests of self, others, the common good. Now, these are certainly great virtues to have, but some might question whether we really have such greatness, especially when people can often be self-centered. Does everyone really have this innate potential for moral goodness? Well, Mencius goes on to explain using a very famous thought experiment. He explains that, my reason for saying that no person is devoid of a heart sensitive to the suffering of others is this. Suppose a person suddenly saw a young child about to fall into a well. They would certainly be moved to compassion, not because they want to get in the good graces of the parents, nor because they wish to win the praise of their neighbours and friends, nor yet because they dislike the cry of the child. From this, it can be seen that whoever is devoid of the heart of compassion is not human. Whoever is devoid of the heart of shame is not human. Whoever is devoid of the heart of deference, this respectfulness, is not human. And whoever is devoid of the heart of right and wrong is not human. The idea here is that any person who suddenly sees a helpless child about to fall into a well would be automatically, instinctively feel moved to try to do something to prevent this. They would feel moved to spontaneously try to prevent the child from falling. And some self-interested calculation. So at the core of Mencius's theory of character cultivation is a belief in the innate goodness and the moral qualities and the moral inclination of human nature. And Mencius goes on to explain that the heart of compassion is the sprout of humanity, the heart of shame, the sprout of rightness, the heart of deference, the sprout of propriety, the heart of right and wrong, the sprout of wisdom. A person has these 4 sprouts just as they have 4 limbs. So what Mencius means is not that all people are necessarily good, nor that we are born good, but that we all have the capacity to become good. This is because human beings naturally possess certain active, observable dispositions for becoming good. And they're what Mencius here calls the sprouts of virtues. And they're the 4 moral qualities we mentioned before: humanity, rightness, propriety, and wisdom. And they're called sprouts because they're the beginnings of virtue, of altruistic feeling and caring dispositions. Now, interestingly, when we look at the Chinese character for sprout, and have that here, this is how we write the character today, it's made up of 2 components, one on the left and the other on the right. The one on the left is meant to depict a person standing on something. It could be the surface of a table, it could be the ground, it could be a surfboard. It's just an indicator that the person is standing on top of some surface. So it uses that sort of a symbol to convey the idea of to stand or to establish. So this is the character for to stand up or to establish something. On the right side is another component, and this is the component for the initial part of something, the start of something. And how it conveys that meaning is through, you have the horizontal line indicating sort of the soil level, the ground, and you have a plant, a young plant just sprouting up through the soil level with its roots extending below, sort of the start, the initial part of the life of a plant. It's used to symbolize, convey the idea of the initial phase of something. So you have a combination of initial and establishment that is put together to mean sprout. And this character alerts us to the fact that these are nascent altruistic feelings that have the propensity to grow and blossom into full virtues. Mencius asserts that the four sprouts are as fundamental to the human constitution as our arms and legs. No one can claim that they don't have these moral qualities because they're something that each and every human being is born with. Mencius goes on to say that, have these four sprouts and then claim that they're not capable of developing them is to prevent themselves from realizing their innate potential for moral goodness. So Mencius tells us that the capacity for virtue is innate to all human beings, but must be cultivated and developed, like what this young fellow is doing here. So how do we do this? When they're sprouts, they need to grow. Well, Mencius explains that an individual develops their moral sprouts by using the mind to reflect on themselves and their conditions. Mencius believed that we can help grow and develop our moral sensibilities through reflection, as he puts it. The job of the mind is to reflect. If it reflects, then it will get virtue. If it doesn't reflect, then it won't get it. So by being mindful and attentive of our thoughts, our motivations, desires, feelings, and then assessing, evaluating our words and deeds, people will discover that not only that they do in fact care about others, but also that by such focusing on their moral sprouts leads them to act morally and enjoy a fulfilling, flourishing life. Now, this is not to say that it doesn't take work to change the way we think and talk and behave, but it's worth it because such positives from moral action, along with a parallel sense of shame or disapproval in misconduct, propels us to become good. So Mencius uses this analogy here with the water to that all human beings have this innate potential for moral excellence. He writes that human nature's being good is like water tending to flow downwards. There's no human who does not tend towards goodness, just as there's no water that doesn't flow down. So I think overall, Confucian perspective offers an incredibly empowering starting point. Now, to understand that inside each and every one of us are these moral sprouts, the virtues, beginnings of virtue that we can and should develop through conscious reflection and following the greater parts of ourselves. Now, this ties in with the Confucian position that human beings have this moral greatness to love and care for all beings that is no less than the virtues of heaven and earth. What are the virtues of heaven and earth? Well, from a Confucian perspective, I'm not talking about the Christian heaven, the heaven and earth, if you can understand, they sort of are appreciated as unconditionally sheltering and accommodating all beings everywhere, every day, unconditionally. And human beings have this moral greatness that is no less than that. So it's an incredibly empowering and positive idea that certainly puts us in the driver's seat in terms of our mental health. So that's realizing our potential. Now, if I turn to our worries, what are we worried about? Well, being able to cope with stress is very important to mental health. Now, stress arises from our worries. And in the Analects, we find that Confucius reminds us of what we worry about and what we should worry about. In the Analects, Confucius said, Don't worry that you have no position. Worry about how you can qualify for one. Don't worry that people don't know you. Seek to be worthy of being known. Now, you might think that it's a little bit repetitive. What is he trying to say here? Well, this might bring to mind, people scrambling for a high-flying job. They might be after some, position in a leadership position in an organization or some high role within the community. And these positions often come with the various trappings of worldly success, for example, like extensive influence, high power, home, cars, expensive holidays. Now, throughout history, wealth, social status, power have been alluring and seductive advantages across all human cultures. And people persist in pursuit of those things. Now, the struggle for wealth and status and power can be fiercely competitive. And that's why they call it the rat race. And it's inevitable that some people will miss out on those plum jobs. And people tend to worry about missing out. Now, as Erin Klein writes in her book called Little Sprouts and the Tao of Parenting, we find that the ancient Chinese philosophers, Confucius included, they talk more about human flourishing, virtue, happiness, fulfillment. They talk about those things more than worldly success. And this is because they recognize that very often people who lead the happiest, most fulfilling lives, those who really flourish as human beings, they're not necessarily the ones who achieve the success that's measured by academic or athletic achievements, or wealth, prestige, or power. If they do possess those things, their happiness and flourishing doesn't depend on them. Now, it's not that the Chinese philosophers disregarded the importance of material well-being. They knew that there was a difference between the goals of providing for our family and earning the highest salary income, the difference between being valued and appreciated and enjoying power and prestige. The Chinese philosophers believe that defining success narrowly in terms of money, prestige, or power doesn't take into account the real marks of a successful life, a life well lived. For example, at funerals, I don't think you'll ever hear anybody remember or eulogize the deceased by saying, how much his income was, or how many cars or boats he owned, or how he crushed in his field of work. The Chinese philosophers understood human flourishing in moral terms. Those who have truly realized their potential are the ones who have most fully cultivated virtues such as humanity and compassion. Now, they're the ones who have found their true calling or vocation in life. They're able to find that place in the world because by doing what brings joy and meaning to their lives and to the lives of others. And it's those things that enables a person to truly flourish and be fulfilled, not things like how prestigious the job is or how much money they make. The Chinese philosophers would tell us that successful life is measured in how a person treats another, how they love and are loved by their family and friends, and in what they do to make the world gentler, more kind, more humane, and more beautiful place. Now, Erin Klein emphasizes, interestingly, that these values and goals are not uniquely Chinese. Every major religious tradition and the works of numerous philosophers throughout history emphasize the value of leading a happy, flourishing, virtuous life over the pursuit of wealth and prestige. Now, when we miss out on some great role or a high-flying job, Confucius and the Analects offers some constructive advice. We should be concerned not with securing the job, but whether we qualify for it in the first place. Do we really deserve such a job? Have we got what it takes to merit the role? Because very often it's not simply about just being able to do the job, but whether we can use that role to make a positive difference to the organisation and to the community. We might have some knowledge, skills, and experience, but do we also have the vision and integrity that the role calls for? If we haven't ticked all the boxes of the job criteria this time, Confucius encourages us to keep working on ourselves, and particularly our ethical character. For example, can we be trusted with all the responsibilities? Can we deliver on what we promise? And this can make all the difference between one job applicant and the next. Now, the contemporary Confucian scholar, Li Bingnan, also points out that one doesn't necessarily need a high-ranking or high-paying position to make a difference, a meaningful contribution to an enterprise or an organisation. I'm sure we can all think of someone who's gone above and beyond the call of duty, and they're probably not even the CEO. So we can understand why Confucius tells us to focus on qualifying for a position. Now, other than social standing and authority that comes with the top job, there's a matter of name and fame. Many people these days wish to be famous. It's generally considered to be a mark of professional success. Others may not pursue fame as such, but they would still want to be recognised in some way, like being honoured for their contribution to their company or industry, or being applauded for their efforts in volunteering their time and expertise in the community. When people miss out on an award or an accolade, they might naturally feel upset for being overlooked. Now, what would Confucius have to say? Well, again, he would encourage us to think and reflect on anything worthy of being known for. If we happen to achieve fame, we can think about how we can use that for the sake of benefiting others in a meaningful way. How we might use our renown maybe to contribute positively, for example, to giving voice to the community or bringing awareness to worthy causes. A person's lack of recognition now may be a sign that they need to improve themselves. And instead of blaming others for not appreciating talents, it's probably best to focus on our areas of weakness. Whether or not we're capable of contributing a meaningful contribution. Now, Confucius also tells us that, and we can see, many times in the Analects, it seems to be a recurring motif. What you should be worried about, what you shouldn't be worried about. There's a bit of a trend. Confucius also tells us that instead of being concerned that no one recognizes our merits or strengths, we should think about how we might fail to know and understand others. So then the latter, worrying about whether you know other people, understand them, recognize their strengths, is certainly worth worrying about, because if we fail to recognize the merits and strengths of others, well, we won't be able to appreciate and learn from them. We won't be able to recognize good teachers around us. We won't be able to distinguish between the friends that will help us improve our ethical character and those that won't. Or we might promote the glib talkers over the honest and dutiful employees. So there are many downsides should we fail to know and understand others. Now, I wonder if you've ever thought about what Confucius himself would worry about. Well, in the Analects, Confucius articulates 4 worries on his mind. Confucius said that I have not cultivated virtue, that I have not imparted my learning, that I'm unable to do what is right, and that I'm unable to correct my shortcomings. These are my worries. As the consummate teacher, Confucius's foremost concern is that he hasn't cultivated virtue. And Confucius is conscious of actively working on his ethical character, and he's obviously leading by example as the best teachers do. So that's his first worry, that he's not cultivated virtue, his virtuous conduct. Confucius then worries about whether he has imparted all he's been taught, what he's learned, that that knowledge can continue to benefit others. And that's the second worry. The third worry is that he knows what is right, but has failed to put it into practice. He's failed to align his conduct with what is right and conduct himself as he should. That's his third worry. And last but not least, Confucius is worried that there are faults in himself that he is yet to be able to rectify. So these are Confucius's worries. Now, because those worries are fairly general, I would suggest that we don't need to be teachers to share those worries, concerns, and reflect on the same questions. So the Analects makes us think about what it is that we're worried about and what we should be worried about. And hopefully maybe worry less from the things that we shouldn't. Okay. Now, what about making the most of life circumstances? Well, ups and downs in our careers, for example, our roles, our interpersonal relationships with managers, colleagues, family, and friends, they can all be key to our state of mind. And here I take an extract from The Practice of the Mean. Now, The Practice of the Mean is a key Confucian text. Some of you may recognize that it is one of the 4 books that were studied as the core curriculum for the civil service exams that took place in the last 600 years of Imperial China. Now, this quote is attributed to Confucius, and it's about adapting to our circumstances, whatever happens in life. The exemplary person occupies their role and acts accordingly without demanding of others. If they occupy a position of wealth and honour, their actions are appropriate to wealth and honour. If they occupy a position of poverty and loneliness, their actions are appropriate to poverty and lowliness. If they occupy a position among the tribes, then their actions are in accord with those tribes. If they occupy a position of misfortune and hardship, their actions are appropriate to misfortune and hardship. The exemplary person is always at ease. Now, there are actually 4 types of common situations in life. We break it down and we can take them one by one. But notice that this is about the exemplary person, someone who is actively working on their ethical character. So how would, if they're in a position of wealth and honour, how do they act appropriate to that? Let's take a look. Well, there's a story from Tang, China, and it's about the poet Bai Juyi. One day, Bai Juyi, who was then the governor of Hangzhou province, he came to visit a Buddhist master by the name of Miao Chao. And he saw that the master was actually living at the top of a tree above ground. So he asked the master, isn't it dangerous for you to live in such a place? Well, the master didn't think that Bai Juyi himself was, in particularly unsafe ground. And he replied, you, governor, are in a much more precarious position. Now, Bai Juyi is a person, his feet firmly planted on the ground. You can imagine his surprise. Why should I be in any danger? Well, the master explained, in the midst of power and privilege, should one make the wrong decision, the consequences could be disastrous for oneself and for the people. He's talking to Bai Juyi in public office. So if you think about it, having wealth and honour means we can affect the lives of many others. And so we have to be careful and cautious in what we say and do. So how should we behave? Well, a popular saying springs to mind. With great power comes great responsibility. Now, this power is not just a reference to Spider-Man-like abilities, but I think it encompasses any authority. And the same could be said about wealth. With great wealth comes great responsibility. Having wealth obviously doesn't necessarily mean a person is also respected or honoured, recognised. People can be rich without having such honours at all, like maybe a lottery winner. They win the jackpot overnight and become a wealthy millionaire. Or people can be influential, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're all that wealthy, like some artists. So here the text states that one has both wealth and honor. So the exemplary person is enjoying both privileges. So it's all the more reason to be responsible, to be conscious of the greater good. So wealth is not a license to be extravagant, and having the power of being recognized, influential, is no license to be arrogant. That's because we have to realize that our wealth and honor is actually derived from others. So, for example, a CEO is a person who heads an organization of employees. Now, if there were no employees, then there really isn't any CEO, is there? So, as Master Xun taught, the ruler is like the boat, and the common people like the water. It is the water that holds the boat up and the water that capsizes it. And that's why we have to act appropriately and responsibly if we happen to be in a position of privilege, either of wealth or honor or both. Now, what happens if we don't have wealth and honor? That's the next scenario. If the exemplary person occupies a position of poverty and loneliness, how do they act appropriately? Well, this is sort of the converse to the earlier scenario. If we look at the epigraph by Liu Yuxi, who's a Confucian scholar, also of the Tang Dynasty, Tang China, and he wrote the epigraph of the humble abode. He wrote, "It is not the height of the mountain. The immortal makes it famous." The immortal is someone known to dwell on the mountain, and it's the immortal, the cultivation of the immortal, that makes the mountain well known. It's not the depth of the lake, the dragon known to dwell in its waters. It's the dragon that makes it auspicious. And the dragon is considered quite an auspicious creature in Chinese culture. Now, this is the humble abode, renowned with my virtue. It sort of highlights that what makes something special is not necessarily the external, flashy features and dimensions. It boils down to how we cultivate our ethical character. The achievement of moral excellence is, quite apart from material positions or perceived influence over others. I suppose if I use an everyday analogy, when we're dining with friends, enjoying the company of good friends, it doesn't matter much whether we're eating at home or we're dining out. Some might say that a simple homemade, home-cooked meal made with love could rival, the finest fare at the fanciest restaurants. So I think that sort of is what this line is getting at. And if you don't have much, well, you'd be surprised that there's much that we can still offer. We can still help others by giving of our time, sharing our knowledge and expertise. A person's generosity doesn't depend on how well off they are. Some people like to pander to others. Some people can be fearful of those with wealth and honor. And this may be because they're not satisfied with their situation. They're seeking for more, and they're hoping to gain that fame and fortune through those people. So this line sort of refocuses themselves on the fact that the exemplary person cherishes above all their ethical character and the cultivation of virtue. Now, what happens if we find ourselves in unfamiliar territory, in a strange and foreign land, among the tribes? Well, how do we act appropriately then? I think many people may have to live overseas, for work or study. This often means living in a different culture, with different language, etiquette, customs, etc. So what do? Well, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. We should accord with the foreign local customs where we are. It's part of being respectful. But that doesn't stop us from upholding our ethical principles. In fact, in the Analects, Confucius said, speak with loyalty and good faith, act with dedication and deference. And even among the tribes, your conduct will be irreproachable. But if you speak without loyalty and good faith, if you act without dedication or deference, your conduct will be unacceptable, even in your own village. So it sort of reminds us that really doesn't matter where we are. What matters is that we accord with those ethical principles by, for example, being considered in our words and actions and being considerate of others. And that's sort of universally appreciated. Now, the exemplary person finds themselves in adverse circumstances. How do they act appropriately then? Well, it's not that the exemplary person will never encounter challenges or hardships, but it's really how they respond to them. To be brave and patient and working through those times. There's the account of Xu Heng, who's a renowned Confucian scholar of the 13th century. One time he was traveling as a refugee, traveling through Heyang area, and there was a severe heat wave. Everyone was extremely thirsty, dehydrated. And they came upon a pear tree growing by the side of the road. As soon as the people saw the pear tree, well, they helped themselves to the pears, while others ate the pears to quench their thirst. Xu Heng, he refrained from doing so. And when he was asked why he didn't take any of the pears, Xu Heng replied that the pears weren't his to take. Well, someone retorted that, well, in these chaotic times, this pear tree probably belongs to nobody at all. So why can't we take the pears? Well, Xu Heng replied that, well, the pears may not have a master, an owner, well, I can be the master of my mind. And by not taking a single pear, even under quite, difficult conditions, Xu Heng exemplified the integrity of the exemplary person. Now, it didn't seem to occur to anyone else, to stop and think, well, does this tree belong to someone? Do I have permission to, take some of the pears? But in the absence of satisfactory answers to those questions, Xu did what the exemplary person would do. He didn't eat the pears because they were clearly not his. He didn't know who they belonged to, but they didn't belong to him. And I think that we can appreciate what Xu Heng did all the more if we put ourselves in the position of the owner of the pear tree. Now, hardship and misfortune doesn't just refer to the natural or man-made disasters. A person can experience misfortune and hardship when the conflict arises in their interpersonal relations. This is probably one of the hardest things we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. The people who seem to make life difficult for us. Now, a person might well wonder why someone is giving them a hard time. Well, if you think about it, no one is perfect, at least not all of the time. And I think that in our busy day-to-day lives, we can sometimes inadvertently, unintentionally caused offence or we've been inconsiderate without even knowing. And it's during these times when we catches our interpersonal relations that we have to reflect on ourselves. And we can use this as an opportunity to grow and to do better. It's when we reflect that we can discover our shortcomings, our faults. So the bottom line is, literally, the exemplary person is always at ease. An exemplary person is able to maintain an equilibrium, maintain equanimity. They don't ask anything of others. They don't expect others to change or agree. Instead, they seek from within and ask themselves, I should be the proactive one in looking for the common ground and looking for ways to better work with or get along with someone else, rather than expecting others to put up with me and my habits. So in this way, we can feel more at ease wherever we are and whatever our circumstances. So we just take a quick look again at the 4 scenarios. In a privileged position, we have to be responsible not to abuse those privileges and to use the resources that we have to try to make a positive difference to the community. When we're less privileged, there's nothing stopping us from working on our ethical character. That's what matters the most. When we're in foreign lands, unfamiliar territory, well, we respect and accord with others. And under adverse circumstances, we can still be at ease by upholding our ethical character. So we can trace a common theme running through the passages that we've covered. Mencius would remind us to tap our boundless innate potential for moral goodness by developing our sprouts of virtue, the humanity, rightness, propriety, and wisdom. Confucius would urge us to focus our attentions and concerns beyond ourselves. Instead of worrying about achieving a position or recognition, we should focus on whether we have what it takes, the upstanding character, the outstanding ability to deserve a position or recognition in the first place. Instead of worrying about others not understanding or knowing us, we should be concerned about whether we understand and appreciate others. And I suppose, regardless of our circumstances in life, there's nothing to stop us from cultivating the right attitude to achieve a flourishing and fulfilling life. Now, quickly talk about this recent book that just came out last year. And it's interesting because Professor of Philosophy Alexis McLeod from the University of Connecticut in the United States, he believes that there are important lessons from early Chinese thinking on mental illness, lessons that further develop the illness, its connection to agency and morality, and our methods of treatment. And he found that one of the important aims of a number of early Chinese texts was to help readers overcome difficult mental states, doubt, depression, anxiety, are examples, and to cultivate positive outlooks that contribute to overall human thriving. For example, he identifies 3 general techniques that I've listed here for treatment that are found in various early Chinese texts that would fit into a consideration of self-cultivation and how it might operate in the context of current day, therapeutic approaches. Now, whereas modern psychiatry looks at mental illness as a matter of individual disorder, the ancient Chinese scholars, have long known to take a communal approach to mental health. And Confucians in particular have emphasized that being part of harmonious and virtuous communities is necessary for the development of healthy behaviors, attitudes, and emotions. It's interesting that Confucians, who writes, Confucians would likely have said of our own modern world that the alienation created by the self-centeredness required for modern economic and consumer culture plays a major role in driving mental illness. Du Weiming, a contemporary scholar of Confucianism, writes that according to the Confucian view, self-centeredness easily leads to a closed world, to a state of paralysis. And MacLeod notes that the kinds of community that promote self-centeredness, self-concern, ranging from seemingly innocuous concern with defining oneself by our individual consumer choices to the corrosive lack of empathy or care for our community, those communities are likely to inculcate in individual members behavioural and attitudinal traits that contribute to mental illness. I think that's quite insightful. Now, as we try to address the widespread issue and the seemingly increasing problem of mental illness, the classical Chinese texts, the early Chinese texts, offer much in the way of timeless perspectives and timely reminders for our mental health and well-being. Now, today we've just covered a handful of tips and advice from the Mencius, the Analects, and the practice of the Ming. I hope that you find them of some use, and thank you very much for your attention.